Hello and welcome everybody to our Formula Fitness on data types. I hope everybody has stretched out, limbered up. I know I have, and by limbered up, I mean had some coffee, as has my wonderful colleague Thomas. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Maria Marquis, and here at Coda, I consider myself the chief cheerleading officer. So I just love our customers. I host events like this. I love to celebrate the great work that's happening. And I also really believe that anyone can be empowered to start to make change and solve those problems that are in their business or their life. So that's why I'm here. But I'm also joined by my fabulous, amazing, awesome colleague, Thomas. Thomas, you want to introduce yourself to the folks on the call in case they haven't met you yet? Go for it.
Absolutely. I'm Thomas. I'm on our customer champion team here at Coda, which means that I help our users do cool stuff with Coda. I may have interacted with you over our chat app, or you may have read some of the help articles we've written, but I'm here to help.
Excellent. Yes. So most of you have probably ran into Thomas without knowing that he's a real person, a real human. And here he is. So Thomas and I are going to work together to facilitate today's conversation around data types. So today's going to be a little different from some of the Formula Fitnesses that we've done in the past, but we're still going to be diving in, exploring. Now, the primary job that Thomas and I have today is to make sure that you leave with all of your questions answered, or at least a better idea of where to go next. So unlike some other webinars where you just sit there and people talk at you, we want to hear from you. So if you've got a question, please use the Ask a Question button along the bottom of your screen, right below Thomas and my beautiful faces. That way we can make sure that we don't lose it in the chat. Because over on the right, we do have that little chat area. You can post whatever's on your mind. It's a great way to stay in touch, but we don't want to lose those questions. Now, just to get ready, make sure everybody has access to chat. Go ahead, post to chat for us. Where are you dialing in from today? One of the things that I love most about the Coda community is that we are global, which is super exciting to me. So go ahead, post to the chat over along the right. Where are you dialing in from? Oh, Thomas, of course, Portland, Oregon. Karina's in Brooklyn. Nice, Edwin in the Netherlands. Thank you for joining us this evening. Calgary, Katie, fabulous. Belgium, hey, Christian, good to see you. Aaron, Canada, nice. NYC for Diana, good to see you as well. Belarus, Lyra, thank you so much for joining us in your evening as well. Hey, Karen, how you doing? It's so good to see you today. So just know that chat field is available for you at any point in time today. Go ahead, use that. But if you do have a question, please use Ask a Question. That way we don't lose it over there in chat. The other kind of cool thing about the Ask a Question area is that you can upvote or downvote questions. So if you have the same one, that helps Thomas and I prioritize. So let's get started with our conversation around data types. So what today's conversation is really about is, why is my formula not working? It's probably because there's a data type issue. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. When you can see it, Thomas, if you just give me yeah, that looks awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your screen with me, Maria. Whenever you can see it.
That looks awesome, Maria.
Oh, fabulous. So when we think about the data that we have in Coda, it's not just text across the board. We don't treat all of the data the same, because with Coda, you can actually combine a lot of different kinds of data into one spot. So you're not just dealing with text or numbers or a reference. You can actually be dealing with all of them at once. So here's what I'm talking about. The first thing is just text. Notice I just typed Project A right into my Coda doc. So it's very simple. There's nothing underneath the hood. It's just something I typed. But then in Coda, we also might have something like a number. So here, I actually have used a formula to pull in some numbers here. I'm pulling from a table called references, and then I'm pulling from a column called effort, which notice it's got this little number icon next to it. That lets me know we're dealing with a number type. Now then I could have something called a reference, which in my mind is the thing that makes Coda particularly cool, because Project A probably has a lot of contextual information about it. In fact, if I open up my sidebar, head over to my data area that I've been playing with, and I open up this fabulous area, Project A is actually part of this whole table. Project A has a start date, it has effort, and it has this really awesome person named Maria Marquis who's running it. So project A, it has all this extra information. So maybe I want to access all that extra information. So that's why references are important. I can do at and then pull in that project. And notice if I hover over it, it shows me all of that good stuff that we saw inside of that table. But this project A is not the same as this project A. This is an apple and this is an orange, which I think is something that I found when I was getting started with Coda was kind of hard for me to understand, that sometimes even though I'm using the same title, there's different kind of attributes about it. Now, another type of data that we have is a date. So I'm going to right click on this little formula that I've built in here. I'm pulling from that references table, just like we saw with the numbers. But in this case, I'm choosing that start date column that we saw. And notice it's got a slightly different icon here. It's that little calendar that lets me know we're dealing with a date type. Now, the other thing that we have is we can then decide for all of those different data types, I want to transform it to a different type. So I can use to date, to time, to text, to date time, 2 days, 2 hours, 2 minutes, 2 seconds, to number. This essentially allows me to take one thing and turn it into another thing. So for example, I could take project A and say to text, and it would be the same as this little guy right up here at the top. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking data types. Thomas, what am I missing when it comes to data types or things that you think are really important for folks to know as they're starting to explore this and kind of take a closer look at the data they're working with?
Yeah, so I think one important thing to know is that you don't have to get your data types right out of the gate. Certainly that's helpful, but you can go back and change data types. We can manipulate data types in flight. So as we're writing formulas, so I know that sometimes I get a little overwhelmed trying to imagine all of the data types that I need to use in a large project. But you don't have to. You can go back and you can manipulate or change these things as you go forward. So don't panic.
Yes. And I think that's actually a really great piece of advice across the board when it comes to working with Coda formulas, is you don't have to get it right the first time. That's why they're editable, right? That's why I can right click on any of these formulas that I've made, take a closer look, and then be like, oh, you know what? I actually want this to be to text. Great. Now I've got this little text field that I can be working with. So it's all about this giving yourself permission to explore, to poke around, to get it wrong, and then to be able to make adjustments and change. Like Coda docs are meant to be edited, so go for it, have fun, go hog wild. I think that's a really key piece of advice. Of course, you'd have the best advice, Thomas. Not surprised at all. So let's start to look at how this can kind of come together. Also, just a reminder here, folks, you don't need to wait for Thomas and I to stop talking. If you've got a question, we want to know about it. So please pop that in at any point in time. That's here for you. Anything that's Coda related is fair game today. So let's start with the first exercise today, which is add a column to the table showing the estimated due date using the start date and the effort. So let's go ahead, reveal our little table here. So this is just a very miniature table, super simple. We've got our project, we've got the start date, and we have an effort. And we know that the due date is going to be the effort plus the start date here. So I'm going to go ahead, open up this formula just by clicking the top, choosing edit formula since it's part of this table. And notice what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, let's take that start date plus the effort. And I'm just deciding I want to transfer this to be a date type. So notice effort is a number, date is a little calendar icon. So we just want to make sure that we're staying in that date type of format. But again, I could be like, you know what, I want to have this be instead of date. I could say, let's make it to text. I just want it to be a plain text field. It's going to display the same information, but have a different data type under the hood. I could also say, for some reason, maybe I want this to be to number. Notice that shows up a little bit interestingly here, allowing us to work with number types. We could also just change it up as much as we like. Now, one thing I will say is that adding to date here, not always necessary, right? I could go ahead and just have it show up this way. But if I want to guarantee that I always have that date type, I can go ahead and do it. And then I can also change this column to be a date. And notice that means that it's now going to show up exactly right. Whereas I might have some issues if this column stuck as a text type and we didn't make sure that we're dealing with a date information here. Thomas, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how you see these different data transformations showing up in tables? Anything that is important for folks to know as far as ensuring that quality across the board?
Yeah, so generally speaking, setting it at the column level is a great idea. Not only does that ensure that every piece of data in the column is the same, but it also gives you that obvious visual reminder right on the table, which I find really helpful when I'm looking at tables and trying to write new formulas. Having that quick access is really fantastic. I will say that sometimes it's worth double checking your old work. Coda tries really hard to assume the best. So perhaps sometimes you don't set a data type and Coda still displays what you're after, but you still might run into problems down the road if you didn't have that column formatted correctly. And that's what tricks me sometimes.
Yeah, because again, just because it's displaying as 12/31/2020, also sorry to my European colleagues here on the call, 31/12/2020, just because that's what's displaying, that doesn't mean that Coda is treating it as a date. It's sometimes it will assume, but not always. So if you know that you're dealing with dates, you definitely want to make sure that shows up so that you can actually do more transformations, right? Maybe I want to add a control that lets me show things in a calendar view. I want to make sure that I'm dealing with date types. Otherwise, the calendar view is not going to know what to do. We have a really good question here from Karina, which is, I assume that some formulas need certain data types. So yes, in this case, it's a matter of if I've got, and we'll actually see something here in a moment, which I think will help clarify. But again, we want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. We're comparing the same thing to the same thing. Otherwise, your formulas might come up with something that's not correct because you're dealing with sort of date formula pieces and then code is dealing with text. So it's really much more around, like, if something isn't working, you want to just check your data types. Did I cover that appropriately, Thomas? Anything else on Karina's question that you think is really important to reference?
No, I think that covers it. I will say sometimes, a formula will expect a certain data type, but will accept the wrong data type. So always double check. Always double check that you've got everything in line.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Karina. Great question. All right, so let's take a look at an exercise that I think might clarify something in this particular vein. So in this case, maybe I want to have a formula to determine whether the project starts and ends on the same day. So in this case, let's go ahead and just reveal the table that I've got here. Notice I've got the project name, I have a launch date and an end date. But notice we also have time here. So this is technically a date time data type. So I know that because it's got this little icon of that calendar with the little clock. That lets me know that Coda is looking at both the date and the time. Now, if I were to put in, does the date equal the date, I would get it staying incorrect here because Coda is thinking of 4/10/2020 or 10/4/2020 at 2 p.m. as not being equal to 4/10/2020 5 p.m. because this is the date type of date and time. So it's not looking at the dates in isolation. So here, what we need to make sure that we do, let's go ahead and reveal the answer here, is, let's go ahead and open up the formula that I built here under Edit Formula. I'm saying I'm using an if statement. So if the project launch date, and notice I'm converting it to date, is equal to the project end date, and I'm converting that to the date type, then I want Coda to say the dates match. If that's not true, I want it to say it does not match. So here, what I need to do is I need to transform that date time into just a date so that Coda can say, yes, this starts or ends on the same day. Otherwise, Coda would only say the dates match if it starts at 2 p.m. in both of those areas. So notice what we're doing here is we're deciding we just want to switch what we're saying is important, right? To help us with this formula. I could do the same thing if I wanted to change this to just be a text field and then comparing. I could do that as well. I could also decide that maybe I want to convert this into a number format. Not sure why I would want to do that in any case, but you can always be switching and adjusting. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to just remove this to date just so we can see the incorrect option here. All right. Let's learn from our mistakes here. So when I press enter, notice this formula has an error. That's because it's no longer comparing the apples to the apples. It's looking at those two separate things. So we always want to make sure we put in that to date formula. Thomas, in looking at this particular one, anything else that folks should know about kind of this conversion or maybe how you see this show up in supporting our customers?
Absolutely. So date times and dates are one of the more common areas we see some confusion. And I
Mhm.
think it's because they're kind of the same. And in
Yeah.
the way that we often think about dates and date times, they're equitable. But Coda is very specific, and it does include that date. What can also be tricky is if you create a date column and you put in only a date, Coda actually stores that as a date time in the back end at
Huh.
midnight. And that can sometimes cause trouble when you have inconsistent data types. So it's one of the areas we do see some trouble with, and it's one of the first places I look when I'm troubleshooting a formula to see if there are dates and date times, and perhaps one of them isn't set exactly right.
Yeah, I love that. And remember, when you're looking at those data types, you always want to just take a look at the little icons that you're seeing, right? So you want to look at this. In this case, we've got that date, time, etc. So you always want to look at those icons to help you figure out what could be going on there. All right. Oh, we got some great questions coming in. So this question is from Agya, and please let me know if I ever mispronounce your name. I do want to make sure that I pronounce it correctly, which is, would the column type affect why a count or a count if doesn't work? For example, when I want to count how many rows in a column that contain a specific word, haven't been able to get that to work, but the data is coming from a type form. Thomas, what do you think if we put our support hats on? Where might we begin with approaching this particular question?
Ooh, that's a tricky one.
Mm,
My mind immediately goes to making sure that what's in that count or count if formula is correct. How you approach verifying whether a content exists in something is different, whether that's text, a list of objects, or something else. And with text, generally find is what you'd want to use. And then find is a little bit of a trickier formula. I know Maria did a really excellent formula fitness around that. And that's actually where I would suggest going first. It's not the count itself that is important when it comes to data types. It's what you're putting in those statements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, I would say the formula fitness where we talked about that was the filter formula fitness, and it would be exercise 6 in that one. But what you want to do here is you want to use, like Thomas said, you want to use find, and you'd want to do find is greater than 0, and that would be like we're looking through the whole display in that table column to see if that word is there. So you're actually going to combine contains and find in that. And I would definitely recommend checking out the filter formula fitness. That'll allow you to go through there. And if we have time at the end, I can open it up and I can show you that. Yeah, excellent question. Perfect. We got another one here, which is every date or date time field under the hood a date time field? I noticed a problem with date grouping. And Eust, this is from our wonderful friend Eust. Hey, Eust, good to see you. And it sounds like that was just answered by you, Thomas, saying that we store it as midnight in the back end. So you'd want to do that convert to date and be able to group. Would that then resolve the problem there, Thomas?
Potentially. It depends on exactly where the grouping issue is going wrong. But I see you have kind of a follow-up question there. If you enter the day on a bunch of data with the date, how can I group by the date if every date field has a different time? So that's when what I would do, and I think the easiest solution here is actually creating an additional column, which is that date time stamp to date. And therefore or to just that day, there's a few options you can go about doing that. One of the really nice things about a date is you can break it down to return just the year, just the month, just the day, or even just the week number that a particular date takes place in. And then you could group on that column instead. And that's how I tend to approach these sorts of problems.
Yeah. Oh, and let me actually just jump in. Let's show some of these little buddies off. So we'll actually just go to the underlying data types here. I'm going to go ahead and add a column. So let's see. We'll do insert column to the right. Why not? So here we could do, let's see, we would do today here, or day of the week. Which is it, Thomas? I forget. Start date. If we wanted to show the day of the week that it is.
I think it is. So to be honest, this is one of the times that I'd go right to our formula list because I always forget this specific one. I think it's weekday, maybe.
I think you're right. So in this case, everybody should bookmark coda.io/formulas. It's a great way to just see like everything that's going on here. And in this particular area, what I always like to do, let's just do a little Control F. And up here, what I could say is show me week, and then is week number. So this would show us which day, which week, which week in the year that shows up, which is really helpful for planning. Like that is, week 26 of 2020. Let's see what other options we've got here. Is week number. We got to just search through these. Week number. So this would also return that as well, but we just put it at the top. Weekday. Here we go.
Ooh, that's the one.
All right, so we're going to go start date, weekday. And you can also start typing here. Notice it's going to fill in everything as well. And then we just press enter. So now we know this is, oh, great. They're all Thursdays, which makes sense because I was just doing every month moving forward. But notice we can switch these around and we'll be able to move them as much as we like. So that's a way that you can start to do those manipulations. And then remembering that this date has all that other stuff under the hood, which means you can pull things out. Excellent. Great. Perfect. Yeah, keep those questions coming. Beautiful. So let's take a look at the next exercise here in our Formula Fitness. Go ahead, close that up. So in this exercise, what we want to do is we just want to remove the hyperlink on the blog post title. So here we go. We've got this table down here. And notice that the doc title is currently a hyperlink, right? It's going to the Coda blog. It's pulling all this information in. But maybe I don't want to deal with all that extra stuff. I don't want to have this hovering. Maybe I want to create sort of a heading that I could use when I'm sending an email out. I just don't want to have that hyperlink. So this is one of my favorite ways to use to text. So you could just add a column. And if we go here to that edit the formula, we could just say, hey, look at the doc title and then make it text instead. So it allows you to kind of strip things out and be able to work with them in new ways. Thomas, how else do you see to text showing up in the troubleshooting that you're doing?
Yeah, so I often use it as its own sort of troubleshooting tool, where if I see a column or a formula not behaving the way that I expect, I will sometimes want to kind of look under the hood to see what that column actually contains. Because Coda has a concept of what you see, the display of data, but also a concept of how that data is stored in the back end. And one trick is to create a column and set it as to text, and then you'll see exactly what's coming out of it. And that helps save a lot of time for me in like debugging situations. And it's a trick I try to really get customers to use themselves.
Nice. So if you're ever like, what's going on here? To text kind of reduces it to its most like core value. Is that a fair statement, Thomas?
I think so. I think that's it is a really useful hammer when you're trying to kind of rattle around your formulas.
I do love a good hammer. And Thomas, I noticed you answered Karina's question, but I really want to make sure we show it, which is, can you convert the day of the week as text? So in this case, we want to use the weekday name. So let's head back to our little data types table back here. So instead of doing the weekday, let's go ahead and just go into this formula. This is one that I'm learning new, which is great. So weekday name, there it is. Boom, Friday, Thursday, etc. So we can go here. And then what I love about this particular bit is that you could then do some concatenate, where you could say, hey, concatenate Maria, your task, project A, is due Friday. So it allows you to kind of pull out all of that extra information. So like Thomas was saying, if this was just a text field, we wouldn't be able to pull this information out, right? Because it's this date data type, we can pull all of this extra contextual information. So just a little bit of a note there. Nice, excellent, perfect. I'm going to use that formula in my next thing. Fabulous. All right, so now let's move along to what I think is probably where I see the most errors when it comes to data types. So let's go ahead and open up exercise 4 here, which is, why is this control not filtering this table? So in this case, this table, if I go ahead and add a new row, I want to go ahead and say, oh, they're project C, but notice how it's getting filtered out, even if I choose project C from this control. Like, why is that not working? Why is Coda not recognizing what I'm looking for? So what this tells me is there's definitely a data type issue going on. So let's go ahead and right click on this control to be able to see what's going on here. So notice I've included the selectable items, project A, project B, project C, and project D. Okay, so far so good. And I want to filter off of this project column. But notice we can see in the icon here that this is not text. This is a lookup, which means it is a reference. So they're not the same. So let's go ahead and take a look at the lookup options here. Notice we're pulling from another table. So we're not just entering text. We're not just typing project A, project B, project C. We're pulling in information from another location. So what I need to make sure that I do is make sure that my data types are matching, because this project C is not the same as project C here, because this project C, if I pull it open and hover, notice it pulls in all of the extra information. This is project C on steroids. So what we want to do, instead of typing in project A, project B, project C, we want to go ahead and get rid of that, use our handy little formulas here. Oh, and here, actually, this is something helpful. Notice it's converting what I did into formula language by just saying, hey, it's a list, which is not the same as a reference. So what I want to do here is I just want to say, let's get this out of the way. No, don't want you. Is just to equal, I think this is called the pesky table dot project. So now, if I have this here, I can start to see, now I have project B. Great, it shows me all of project B. If I choose project A, it's gonna show me all of that. And project C, it's gonna show me all of my project Cs as well. So now we're comparing apples to apples, which is why this now works. And this is something I see all the time with new Coda users. Like, oh, I'm put the text in there, it doesn't seem to be working. It's probably because you're dealing with a reference. And you'll know that you're dealing with a reference if it's got this handy little outline around it that lets you know, hey, there's more under here. Check it out. Thomas, anything else on this particular topic that you think is helpful for folks to know, like references, text, comparing across tables?
Yeah, I think references are an area that I see folks get tripped up on a lot, and that's because they are those like special objects.
Yeah.
They're more than just their name, and sometimes that like complicates formulas, or sometimes you just really want to simplify it. And for example, you might just want to get the name Project C, and that could itself be a text field, and you can do that by referencing that row object and then the dot name operator or the name column, and pull that information out so that perhaps there's a date in there that you want to work with. You can grab that specific information when you're using it, title, or start date. You can grab that information out and specifically reference that, as opposed to looking at just the entire lookup reference object. And it allows you to do some really cool things, even if I don't always immediately think of doing them with that. So keep it in mind.
Mm-hmm. And again, just to reinforce, notice the icons that we're seeing here, right? Title is a text field. That's why it's got that nice big old T. But project, it's got this little row that lets me know that it's referencing a row somewhere else. So a helpful way to kind of take a look at it. And notice these are not equal, right? Project C is not equal to Project C. This is just the title by itself going out into the wide world. This is Project C and all of the context along with it. We had a really good question here, a follow-up on the weekday, which is, are the days of the week a date or text? Well, let's go take a look. So let's head back to where we were playing with that. And let's go to the formula here, and we'll go to edit the formula. It looks like that's just a basic text field. Yeah? I'm reading that correct, right, Thomas?
Yeah, it returns just a text field because Friday doesn't have a specific date it's referencing. It's like a property of a specific date.
Yeah, nice, cool. Good question. Are there any things that references cannot do? I personally like to use references whenever possible, just because, number one, it allows you to keep things standardized. You don't have to worry about like duplicating efforts, or what if the project name changes? Now you have to change the name everywhere that you've typed it in. Like, nobody's got time for that. And it also means that the power of what's going on under the hood is always available to you. So in general, I recommend sticking with references because it's going to save you time, and it's going to allow you to manipulate and use all of that underlying data whenever you need to. those are my general points. As far as things that they cannot do, it's really just making sure that your data types agree, right? So if you ever need to pull in that text, just do a to text or pull just the part of it that you want, like the title, and that'll allow you to make connections. But in general, I think opting for references as your go-to is going to be the right call. Does that make sense, Thomas? Anything else on that particular topic that you think is valuable that I'm missing?
No, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. I don't think you're missing anything. And in fact, I might reframe the question as less that like, it's not that references can do more things than standard data by far. And you can then, if you just need that text or other standard data, you can explode that out of the row reference. They're very magical in what they can do with Coda.
Yeah, I love that. Ooh, this is a really good question from a gal, which is when should you use a reference versus creating a new view of the data table? Such a good question. So as far as how references and new views work together, I like to think about creating new views is when you want to see the same information in a different way, right? Like, okay, here's our project table, but you know what? I really want to see this in a Kanban approach, or I really want to see this as a calendar. Or, you know what? Thomas just really wants to make sure that he filters out everything that's not his. He doesn't want to see anyone else's stuff. That's when a view is going to make sense. You're dealing with the same information. You just want to kind of look at it in a different way. You're going to want to use a reference when you're kind of wanting to pull that information into some new information. So I think a great way of thinking about this is, let's imagine a task table, right? If I have a task table, I'm going to use a view to create a My Tasks view, which filters out everything except my tasks, or I'm going to use a view to show that in a Kanban. But I'm going to use a lookup, a reference, if I want to pull in what is the master project that those tasks are all part of. I've probably got another project table which lets me know kind of the funding, who's owning it, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need that in the task table, right? But I do want to just pull in, hey, this project is the one that's connected to it. So a view is the same data in a different way. A reference allows you to pull information from another location to add a little bit of context. Thomas, how do you think about views versus references? Any other tips or tricks you might give to folks? I think it's a great question.
I think your answer was really fantastic. I have very little to add, except that I often will think of references as relationships too. It's to me to demonstrate a connection between two things, even if I'm not necessarily pulling in too much from that. I like to be able to associate items together, whether that's just for the visual relationship or if I'm using that later in formulas.
Yeah. If any of you are sci-fi folks, a reference is like a wormhole to another location. Right? So that's something to think about. If that's not helpful, you can disregard it. But if you're a sci-fi person, that's what I recommend. But yeah, I like it that this is related information. It's not necessarily part of that core data set every single time, but it's related, it's connected. I love that. Excellent. Fabulous. So those are the core exercises that Thomas and I wanted to share. But, again, Thomas, you are working with these, as far as troubleshooting, because that's really where we see these coming alive. It's like, oh, I'm just not comparing apples to apples. So I'd love to just hear from you, Thomas, any other common mistakes or, consistent types of misunderstandings that we see that we can help debunk or open up for folks today? Also, remember, everybody, if you've got questions, please let us know. Thomas and I are here for you for as long as you need us, as long as that ends at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So please let us know how we can be of service. Again, anything Coda related, fair game. But yeah, Thomas, over to you. What are some common misunderstandings you see?
Yeah. So one thing that we touched upon a little bit, but I think there's more we can say about is those icons in formulas. So you talked about how we can see like there's this calendar icon, but if you go back to the workout routine, there's actually a different level of icons that I think is valuable. So up in the top, you had your example with a list of numbers. Can you show that one? So there's something different about this list of numbers, and you'll notice that little number icon is actually a stack. There's multiple icons there. So what that's telling you is that the object you're returning is not a single thing. It is a list of things, a list of numbers in this case. And how you deal with a list is often different than how you deal with a single object. It's one of the little tells that I use when working with a formula that isn't producing the results that I expect. I'll go look into see if any of those objects are stacked. Is this a list? And then if it is, the to text of list is first. The first formula grabs the first item from a list. And this is really interesting in that sometimes you get a list of one or a list of one result and other blank ones. And first is really the tool that grabs the item that you were expecting. But a great troubleshooting thing to look for, a tell as I call them, are these things a stack, or is it just the one object? And what am I expecting? Did I expect one thing? Then first.
Yeah. And the same thing happens here if we right click on the date here. Notice it's the same thing, but a stack of little calendars. And first, last are really helpful, but also you can do nth. Like maybe I want to know what is the third date in a list. So nth is just saying, hey, just choose your number. So I could say the third or the second, the first, the fourth. So that's another helpful thing to look at. Yeah. Excellent. Anything else, Thomas, that you think is valuable for folks to know as far as common troubleshooting?
Yeah, so that I mentioned date times earlier, and one tricky thing about date times is they are dependent on your time zone. So something that we sometimes see is someone sending, 10:30, 2020 at midnight, and then they're using our API, and then that's coming through in a different day over the API. And that's because our API is specifically set to Pacific time. And depending on your time zone, 10:30, 2020 at midnight may be 10:29, 2020 somewhere else. So that's where that idea of like a date being also a date time can get tricky, is in time zones and time zone management. It's rare, but it does get you.
Great call. Yeah, time zones are always a bit complicated. And then as far as like being able to change your docs time zones, you can always go over to the little gear menu here, and then your time zones right down at the bottom. So you can go ahead and change what you're looking at. But again, the API, you're going to want to account for it if you're building on top of it. Ooh, we have a good question here, which is, I don't see, for example, an email type field. Can you enforce an email address other than with a regex function? Ooh, that one is a bit of a stumper for me. What I will say is you can pull email address out of the people type. So let me just show you what I know before I see if Thomas has some better words of wisdom than what I can provide for you today. So here, notice we have this people type. It's got that little human thing, but maybe I just want to show the email address. I could go ahead and type plus. I'm going to choose to make this a text field. And I'm going to say equals the people. And I'm going to choose that column dot email. And notice that is a text field in this case, but it's pulling out that email address. So I could then use this to send emails out using the Gmail pack. But yeah, Thomas, anything else on use question here that you can weigh in on here on the fly?
Ooh, this is a tricky one. You could potentially do regex validation there. That is tricky. Regex is a whole Swiss Army knife of options when it comes to text. But there, having an email column type is a really great idea. And I know that I've heard us discuss that in the past. And that would be the ideal solution. But in the meantime, personally, I try to make sure that folks' emails that I'm referencing whenever possible are using the format that Maria suggested here, people.email. I know that's not always possible. Say you're working with client information. That makes things a little bit hard. One other option is like perhaps just a more simple kind of like validation column, like just to check to see if it has an @ sign. That's not perfect, but it is a bit easier than writing out full regex statements. Yeah. But yeah, that is a fantastic question.
Excellent. Thanks, Thomas. I appreciate it. We have another question from Eust, which is, can you ask for the previous or next row in a list, like with first or last? So maybe I want to return what happened beforehand. I think we've got a drag and drop template that allows you to kind of work through rows previous and last. But I think the key here is that Coda, unlike Excel or Google Sheets, it's not about location, right? We're not dealing with coordinates. Like this is row B, not, well, Excel doesn't even do rows. This is cell B7 to B11, right? We treat each row as its own unit that can be moved anywhere. Location doesn't matter. So it gets slightly more complicated. But yeah, Thomas, what are your thoughts on this idea of like dealing with rows and sequencing? Any words of wisdom here?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. The concept of next and previous, as you mentioned, doesn't super very well exist in Coda. But if you had a list of rows, you could apply sorts to them, and then kind of speak to their known locations using that nth. But yeah, that still lacks previous or next. That's just a tricky concept. And generally speaking, what I do say is when I find myself having a desire for previous or next, it's a place where I stop and say, perhaps my schema isn't exactly what I need it to be. And that's something that I find myself hitting up against a lot. And a piece of advice I often give folks is when something seems really hard in Coda, it's often because we haven't put our schema in the way that Coda expects. And like myself, I came from a spreadsheet background. I find myself falling into spreadsheet habits. And that's like an indication for me that perhaps I'm trying to do something spreadsheet when our table data isn't really set up for that.
It's a really good call. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the word schema, it essentially means like, how's my data organized? How do I have it all put together? So here is one of our in-doc templates, and just in case folks mixed, I should have had a second cup of coffee, Thomas. In case folks missed it, she did it. There you go. You can always type / and be able to see all the various templates that we've got. So like remote meeting agenda, or maybe I want to make a voting table, a great way to get to all those things, or also just an easy way to start like working in Coda quickly. Like I want to work with a table, for example. But this cumulative sum is actually dealing with row location. So I want to open up this formula and take a look to see if there's anything we can learn. So notice what we're doing here is we're doing rows and row numbers. Okay, so we're using the row ID and row number to kind of give us an element of location. So we're saying, hey, look at the items table. Then I want to filter where the row number is greater than or equal to this row's row number. And then I want to sum the cost. So here what we're doing is we're like moving through row after row after row. So it's a little bit inelegant, but there might be something to be mined here used as far as something you might be able to work with. But yeah. Not exactly a perfect solution, again, because like Thomas said, we're not dealing with sort of spreadsheet logic. We're dealing with data set and data type logic, which ends up meaning that locational habits that we might have may not always play out in Coda. Christian has a question here, which is, can you use trim to take away the spaces, for example? I would assume so. Is trim something we have? I've actually never worked with that. What do you think, Thomas? Let's take a look.
I think I'm actively looking that up in the formulas tab, which is something I do all day, despite working with Coda formulas constantly.
And I think this is also something, even though Thomas and I are in Coda all day long, we still are looking things up all the time and playing with things. Like right now, I'm like, all right, well, trim 2, it doesn't take that. It takes an argument. So I want to actually trim taking out extra spaces. Okay, so this is actually, we want to compare so that it let me know that we need to deal with text. So it would be like, all right, I want to take out, I want this to say groups instead, and then that'll pull it in. But yeah, I would think trim actually doesn't seem to be super helpful in this case. You might be able to do something with like nth to filter out data sets, but I'd honestly need a little bit more time to take a look at trim to really understand it as far as how it's working through.
Trim can be useful in trying to keep your data validated. For example, if you were intaking data from a form, like we were talking about email addresses, if someone has put a space accidentally in the front of your email or at the end of your email, that's a really fantastic use for it. I think of that as like a data hygiene tool.
Yeah.
So that's a good option for it. But yeah, I don't think I've ever used trim before. So good call out.
I think you're right that having it be a cleanup is going to be the right call, which if any of you are using like the type form pack to pull in form information, allowing you to do that cleanup as you would in a more traditional spreadsheet situation might be the right way forward. Excellent questions, everybody. I love it. We've had some stumpers. We've had some really interesting approaches, which is great. We've got about 15 minutes left. So if there's any other questions you have, please let us know. We're more than happy to help. I also just want to do a big, huge thank you, Thomas, for taking time out of your busy day to sit down and chat with us. I know it's always a pleasure when we get to hang out. And I really glad that you're with us today. Yeah, I totally can share the doc. I just need to do a little bit of cleanup here. So while we're waiting for some more questions to come in, let me just clean up this doc so that we've got that there, since I made some changes here. All right. So we can do some formulaic things on the fly. All right. So I need to change my handy little control back to a text field since I fixed it, I resolved it. I'm going to go and make that mistake as much as it pains me. Project A, project B, and project C, and project D. And then we had one more that we wanted to adjust up here, which is our formula. We have an if statement. I'm in the your answer area. Again, any questions y'all have, please let us know. So go ahead and edit. Awesome. Well, it looks like questions have come to an end. So I guess we can go ahead and end our session for today. Any other final words of wisdom, Thomas?
Oh, it looks like we got another question.
Oh, excellent. Let me just go and take a look at that. Oh, fabulous. What would I do without you, Thomas? So from use, back to the earlier question, can you show how to change any date time field to a uniform date with all the times being like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0? Thomas, how do you think about this particular question? I don't think I have a good answer off the top of my head.
Well, here's what I would say. I would take a step back from the specific question and work backwards from the need that you have. Like, what's the trouble you're running into? And I say that because I haven't really found a strong need to do that. When you've got a date entered as a date and you're always referencing it as a date and not a date time, the fact that there is that midnight attached to it shouldn't impact your usage of things. And if it is, that might be a situation to go look back and say, okay, am I always calling it as a date? Am I referencing out other things as dates as well? But it is technically possible if you would really like that, but that is a longer answer. And I'd be happy to help you with that if you were to write it.
Yeah, go ahead. Just in the lower right of your screen, you can always go click on the question mark to get in touch with Thomas and his team. And it sounds like used to saying the trouble is with grouping. One thing that we do internally, which I might offer, is when we're planning out our year, for example, we convert all of our dates to like the week number, and that allows us to group by week number, and then you can also group by the date in that, which would be interesting. Oh, darn, I never can get my access correct on my publishing elements. Well, I'll make sure that I fix that for y'all in just a moment. Let me see here. Oh, here we go. Well, that's why. No access. There you go. Now it should work. Let me know if that's the case. All right. Excellent. We got a question from Katie, which is on a select list column type with multiple selectable items. Can you alphabetize the selected items? For example, when someone chooses a couple items from the select list, it orders in the order they selected. So this is possible for if you're dealing with a reference, like a lookup column, like having the select list be populated by another table. You can have that stay in the sort. But Thomas, how do you handle this? When we think about like keeping a select list in alphabetical order, that's not a reference.
A tricky one. I don't know that I've ever done that, and I would have to experiment. Or ideally, someone has done that experimentation and made a wonderful post on our community. That would be the first place I'd check. But that's not something I've done myself. It seems like it might be possible though.
What I'll offer, Katie, is what you can always do. With a select list, let me actually just go in and make one really quickly, is you can always do a convert to table, which then would allow you to have a reference letting you sort. So maybe I want to go ahead and say, Let's go ahead and just add the select list here. All right, we'll just say A, B, C. Notice there's this little convert to table button. If I click on that, it's going to say, great, do you want this to be below the current table or in a new page? I'm going to do it below the current table just so we have that for us right now. And it just creates a simple little table of just one cell in the row. And now I've got this select list over here, and it's actually reference. We got the little outline, right? So we go B and C. And then now when we're in our lookup options up at the top, you can go ahead and say, I want to have multiple selections. You could also then make it so that it's staying sorted by whatever is sorted down here in this table. So that might be another little workaround. But like Thomas said, checking out the community, always a great place to go because our community folks are brilliant and fantastic. And there's all kinds of really niche questions and topics that folks are digging into there. And it's a great way to get other people's input on what they've seen work really well. Yeah. So hopefully that helps. Give it a go. I also find that the convert to table pattern that I just showed you is really helpful. Like as your Coda doc grows, you're like, oh no, this should have been another table. Why didn't I do that? Why can't I see the future? Convert to table allows you to create that really quickly. And then you don't have to worry about like re-architecting everything. Yeah. Excellent. Any other thoughts, feelings, emotional outbursts, or questions that we can help with today? Let us know. Also, on our Crowdcast channel, you can catch all of our previous episodes of Formula Fitness. Definitely check out the one about filters. The one about concatenate was really fun as well. And we have a few more Formula Fitness coming up in the next couple weeks. So definitely check it out. All right. See, final little interpretive dance to see if anything comes through. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Thomas. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. It's always a pleasure hanging out. We are more than happy to assist you. Please get in touch with us via our support channels, via the community. We are here. There's an entire company ready and waiting to help you be successful. So please let us know what else we can do to support you. And we'll see you next time. All right. Bye, everybody. Bye, Thomas.
Bye. Thank you.